Hey guys, welcome. On this video I want to show you how to build this application which keeps track of your notes. So you have any notes, you can save notes, you can edit them, you can delete notes. So the purpose of this program is to basically get you into that full stack mentality and help you to learn how to connect front end with back end, and also how to work independently, because sometimes it may be hard when you're starting out to know how to make progress without the backend, or vice versa. So I will split the course so that at the beginning we work on the front end without starting the backend, and then we can work on the backend and then connect everything at once. So if this is something you're interested in, we're going to be using React, Redux, .NET Core 3.1. We're going to use Entity Framework Core and SQLServer. Stick around and I hope you enjoy. So prereqs for this video is to have ASP.NET Core 3.1, Visual Studio, and be able to start with React. And that's about it. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is open up your browser, type Redux, and go to redux.js.org. Then we click on Get Started, and we're going to copy this, which this is the template we're going to get. This template has, it's React, and it has Redux and all the stuff we need for our project. Okay, so now what we want to do is go back to your computer, open Bash, and paste that command we just copied in here. Let's rename the project to notes.frontend. Hit enter, and it should take about a minute or two before it completes successfully. So we can see that it has finished, and if we scroll up, it says success. So it has created our project. Cool. So let's go inside that folder, and if we hit tab, it auto completes. And if you're using Visual Studio Code, like I am, you can do code and then do a dot, hit enter, and it should open that directory. So here it is. Here is our project. So I'm going to expand source, and then we'll see everything that got created for us. So we have app, we have feature and app. So let's hit right here at terminal, and let's do an npm start. Let's make sure that this is actually working. So it should take a tiny bit of time, and it should load up. Okay, it's loading right now. It's taking a few seconds, and there you have it. Okay, so back to Visual Studio Code. Let's delete some of the stuff that got created for free for us. So I'm gonna highlight all this stuff, and I'm gonna get rid of it. I'm gonna get rid of that because we don't need it. And then I'm gonna change syntax here because I like better to do it like this. Feel free to leave function if you want. It's really personal preference. And then I'm gonna clean that up. We're gonna get rid of this directory. Yes. Yes. Okay. That was weird. Okay. So we got rid of that. Now we have store, and I like to organize my things a little differently. So I'm going to create a Redux directory, and then I'm going to move my store inside there. Move inside there, then I'm going to get rid of app. Or actually, I'm just going to rename it to components. Components, there you go. And then that's it for right now. It's looking good. One thing we have to update, since we moved this thing out of the way, and actually this thing doesn't exist now. So let's create our first reducer, and I'll explain in a moment what that is for those of you that don't know. So I'll call it notes reducer JS, and that's what we need, notes reducer. Notes, and that's right here in notes reducer. Perfect. Okay, and then I'm gonna call this notes reducer. This way, notes reducer. Okay, I'm gonna put a capital. And before I forget, we have to change this from app. Since we moved the store inside Redux, we have to put it as Redux right now. Okay, so okay, everything should be fine now. So we just moved stuff here. Since we got rid of the other reducer, we created this one, which we haven't implemented yet. So we can start with this one, and we'll go from here. So before we start writing any code in here in the reducer, I want to go over what a reducer is for those of you that are new to React and don't really have a grasp of this yet. So a reducer basically specifies how the application state changes in response to actions being dispatched, meaning some actions get triggered and the reducer changes the state. And what is a state? State, you can think about it as basically a place where you have, like, think about it as like global variables. So it's like a place where you have like information that you need. So what tends to happen in real life applications is like people tend to put too many things in the state, and you should run away from that, because you don't want to have, just like in a regular program, you don't want to have like global variables. The state is the same thing. So you only need to put there what you need, but not more. And it's very tempting at times to put a lot of things in the state, but you should not do that. So in our application, what we're going to have is we're going to have a state for our notes. All the notes are going to go in the state. All other stuff that we need, we're going to have local state to the component, which does not go to the global state. So keep that in mind. So now we're going to start writing the reducer, and what I want to do is I want to combine the action types and action creators with the reducer. There's different ways you can organize a project. You can pull these out into like an actions JS file, something like that, but that tends to get messy, my opinion, and then you have a lot of these and you have a lot of files. So what I like to do is I like to combine these. So let's start with oops, where am I writing? Okay, let's start writing the initial state. And like I said before, the initial state will only have a notes array. Okay. Next, let's write the action types. And for right now, what we're going to do at first is we're going to be able to display a list of notes that we already have. So we only have one action, which is set notes. So we're going to do set notes. Okay. And now we're going to export the action creators. And then this will be set notes. And then this will take a payload, which payload is basically anything you pass into this function. So this is types that set notes payload. Okay, so now we're going to write our reducer. And then state is going to be equals to initial state, and then it's going to take an action. So now, depending on the action we get, which right now we only have one, what we want to do is we want to switch through action.type, and then in case types is set notes, we want to return what do we want to return here? So basically what we want to do is we want to create a new array with all the notes and then set it in the state. So we'll do state notes, and it's going to get assigned the action that payload. And then if you do Alt-Shift-F, Visual Studio Code helps you to reorganize your code. Okay, so cool. We have this. We're basically creating a new array, and then we're assigning it to a state. And that's the only case we have. And then let's do a default case. And default, just return the state. So to iterate real quick, we have a initial state, which is, this is what we're going to have. We're going to have an array of notes. Action types is set notes. Action creator is set notes, and then we get we pass a payload, which is going to be an array of notes. And then when the reducer sees this type of action set notes, what it's going to do is going to create a new array and assign it to notes out of it. So that's it. That's nice and simple. So this is our first action. We're going to have 3 more. We're going to have one action to set all the notes. That's when we're pulling the first time and getting all the notes from the web API. The second action is going to be to create a note. So meaning whenever we create a new note and we basically make a request to create that new note is going to, the response to that is going to have an ID of that note, and then we're going to append that note to this array right here. We're going to have third action is going to be edit a note, and then that's going to get a response, and if the response is successful, we're going to edit in our state as well that specific note. And then last one is going to be delete note, and we make a request to delete the note. If it's successful, then we go ahead and delete the note from the state. So we'll have 4, and then we'll go a step at a time. Okay, so now we have first action, but how do we use it? So what we have to do is, and what I want to do first is create a new folder directory, and I'm going to call it services. And in here, we're going to have all the files that will make our request to retrieve nodes, create new nodes, edit, delete, etc. So we're going to create a new file in here called nodes nodes such as, yeah, that sounds good to me. Okay. And in here, what we want to do is retrieve those nodes, right? So what we're going to do is export get nodes, this guy, and then async, going to be asynchronous. And then we're going to pass it a dispatch. And then we'll have a try and a catch. And then I'll do a console log here. Error. And in here, we're going to have the request, basically, to retrieve all the nodes. Since we don't have a web API at the moment set up, what I'm going to do is fake a response. So I'm going to say response equals, it's going to be an array. And then I'm going to say this is a value. And I'll say study for exam in 3 weeks, let's say. And this has an ID of 1. And I'm going to copy this thing. Okay. And I have some more nodes. So this ID 2, ID 3, ID 4. So at this rate, I will be a master in no time. Build more full stack applications. I love writing notes. Okay, so pretend for a second we made the call to the API and this is a response we got. And then what do we do with that response? Well, we're passing this dispatch, and like I said before, you need to dispatch an action, and then that would trigger a sequence of things, and then eventually the reducer will change the state, right? So we'll do dispatch, and then we got to specify what are we gonna dispatch. So we're gonna dispatch action creators that set notes, and then we're gonna pass a response. So one thing we need to do is we need to import this so we are able to use it. Action creators from Redux / nodes reducer. Alt Shift F if you need to. And all right, we have our first service. Cool. Now we are able to get notes. So since we have this, all we got to do now is call this method. This method will set the notes in state, and then we should be able to use that to display the notes. So before we can write our first component, what we want to do is we want to install React Bootstrap so that we save some time without having to come up with this nice looking forms and buttons and whatnot. So type React Bootstrap, get started, and then we're just going to use this guy, and we're going to run that, and we're going to import this bad boy as well. So back in VS Code, what we want to do is we're going to click here, new terminal. This will open a second terminal. So if you click here, you can switch between the first one and the second one, in case you didn't know this. And then we're just going to paste this npm install React Bootstrap. This will take a minute or two, and then it should install successfully. All right, now that it finished installing, we want to go to index, and we want to paste that import. So now we're able to use Bootstrap. So let's go ahead and create that new component. We're going to call it notes table.js, and this component will have the table with the list of nodes. So that's what it's going to display. So we'll need to import React and use effect. This is a hook. React. We need to import the use selector. Oops, use selector. This is another hook from React Redux. We're going to import use dispatch. Actually, let's put it in here. Use dispatch. And we're also going to import get notes from service we just created. Services slash, what did I call it? Notes, okay. All right, Alt-Shift-F and nice. Okay, so let's export const notes table. And then this will have a variable selector and then I'll explain what this is. So right here, this is a use selector from React Redux, and what this does is basically it accesses the state and then gets whatever it needs to get from the state. In this case, we have notes reducer, and then the notes reducer has notes inside. So it's going to grab those notes and store it right here in this variable. So let's go ahead and have it dispatch ready. Okay. We have that. Now let's to the use effect, and I'll explain what this is in 1 second. So the use effect is used for, well, effects. So what we want to do here in this case is retrieve, when the app loads, we want to retrieve the notes and just be able to, you know, display it. So remember when I said we had to make a call to this guy and actually make the API call and request the notes? Well, that's essentially what we're doing here. We're going to make the call. So we're going to say get notes, and we're going to pass dispatch. And what we want to do is use effect takes two parameters. The first one is a function, and the second parameter is an array of dependencies. And basically every time, whatever you put in that dependency, every time that changes, the use effect is going to run. That function is going to run. So since we only want it to run once, which is the first time, right? And that means that all we got to do is leave it blank, and that's all there is to this. And then last but not least, we're actually going to create a table. So let's say class name equals table dark, and then let's do a t body, and then in here we're going to say notes that map, and we're going to go through all the notes, basically iterating. And since I don't have any curly brace, self is just going to return whatever I put in here. So what do I want to return? I want to return a table row with table data of, basically we just want the end.value. And let's give it a little of a style. just to make it look a little better. And I'm gonna do it right here, inline, and now left. And this is all we have to do for now in nodes table. We have our first component, and all we gotta do now is go to app, and we just gotta display it. So why don't we do that right now and see if it works or if we missed something along the way. All right, so one thing I want to do is I want to have maybe an H3 or something saying my notes, and in here probably going to make it a little smaller because that's going to look too wide if I leave it like that. So I'll say max width of say 70%. And then I'll do a margin of auto, so it's in the center. And okay. All right, and yeah, all we got to do now is do notes table, and let's import that. Import notes table from components / nodes table. Okay, so it seems like we have an error. It says module not found. Can resolve nodes reducer in. Okay, so nodes.js, nodes reducer cannot find it. So yeah, we're missing a / there. And if we go back to the app, now we're able to see all the nodes. And if we check the state, we click on this little DevTools Redux thing, go to state, open this up, you see nodes, open that up, and then we'll see all the nodes that we just typed earlier. Sweet. So let's recapture what is going on. So we have app.js as nodes table. If we hit F12 on that, it will take us here. Nodes table is a component and is iterating through the array of the nodes, and it's just displaying them as a row in a table, right? So how is it getting that note? So there's this use effect hook that calls get notes, and it passes a dispatch to it. And get notes is a service that we're fakely making a request right now, which is just a hard-coded response, and we're dispatching an action with that response, and then we set the state. Once the state is set, then this refreshes, and that's when you see the list of notes show up. So now let's add a delete functionality. All right, so to do that, let's go to nodes reducer and let's add a new action. It will be note delete note, and I'm going to copy this thing, delete note, delete note. There you go. And then this will be a new case, action types that delete, and then you're gonna start seeing the pattern here, right? So the difference for this case would be that we have to iterate through the array of nodes and delete the one we want with that ID, essentially, and just return a new array with it. So let's do a for loop. I mean, not a for loop, but just a for, did I say for each? Just a for loop. And equals to 0, where I equals is less than state that nodes that length. Okay. I plus plus. Oops. Okay, and in here, let's do an if statement. If state that notes at id equals action payload.id, then we're going to do state that notes that supplies, or however you pronounce that, I1. And what this is doing is just removing that element from the array, and it's not leaving any gaps in the array. And then let's just break. So after doing that, all we gotta do left is return state note and state that notes. And that's all we gotta do here. So essentially we add a new action and we're just removing that element from the array. Last thing we gotta do, or I mean, this is the first thing. Second thing we gotta do is do another of our services, fake API calls kind of thing. So, well, actually in this case, I don't think we need it. So let me just remove this for a second. So I'm gonna do delete note. We're gonna pass a dispatch, and then we're also gonna pass the note we want to delete. So we're just gonna pass a note inside there for now. And instead of set notes, it will be delete note. Okay, so we have this new function or service. So now let's go to the table and let's add a new, actually I'll put it right here on top. Let's add a new one, and I want to change the style. So I want to change it to, actually I want to make it smaller. Make it smaller, and then in here what I want to do is I want to have a button class name equals button danger, and then on click I want to call the delete note and pass dispatch and pass the note itself. And then we got to close this and do like delete or something like that. Sounds good to me. And delete node got automatically added here, so it found it. That's perfect. And the only thing we're missing is button from React Bootstrap. Okay. It took a second to compile, but let's check it out. So now we have our delete button next to each one of the rows. So if, say, we want to delete this guy, actually, we're only deleting, no, we're deleting each ID, so it should be fine. It should delete the one that we want. Cool. And if we refresh the page, it should come back up. So let's say I delete this very, I would be a master in no time. If we check our state, we'll see that that one is missing. It's not here. And then if we see the actions, we'll see that first set the notes with all this stuff, all the notes we had, and then it deleted this one. So nice way to debug. So up next, we're missing the add a new note and edit a new note. So let's go to the reducer again, and let's add those in. So this would be new note, and this will be edit note. edit note. And I'm gonna copy this too. And then this will be new note, edit note. So this will be new note, edit note. Perfect. So you know the pattern already. We're gonna do case, and then we're gonna do new note, and a new note is just gonna return state notes, and then we're just gonna append that new note to the existing notes. So this is a way to just append the incoming note to the list of notes, pretty much the array of notes. Next, let's do the case for edit note. And then actually this guy, we do have to check the ID. So let's just copy this, because we have to loop through the array and then check the ID. If the ID is equal, then what we want to do is we want to do state.notes at I, that value equals action.payload.value, because we want to set the new value coming in to that specific node. And then last but not least, let's return state notes, state.notes. Let's just return that array. Okay, so for right now, we are done with the reducer and action. We have our set notes to set all the notes, delete a note, oops, new note, edit note, and we set it up, the reducer, to take care of the state changing. So this is really good progress so far. So next we're going to build a model, and the model will be used to create a new note or edit an existing note. So let's create a new component. Let's call it note model.js. And what we're going to do is we're going to go back here to React Bootstrap, and we're going to search for a modal. And this one looks good to me, so we're going to copy all this code. So let's paste that code in here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a note model. And we're going to be passing stuff to this, but for now, I'm going to leave it empty. And then let's get rid of this guy. Actually, let's get rid of this too, guys. There you go. So it should be inside now. Nice. Okay. Cool. So we have this. Now we need to have a add new entry, add new note, and edit new note. So let's create those two components, and that's what we're going to be exporting. As you see, I'm not exporting this thing. So we're going to be exporting new note model and edit note model. So let's do that. Export const new note model. And we're going to export edit note modal. Nice. Okay. So these are the ones that are going to trigger this modal to pop up, show up, and disappear. So we need this thing here, and I'm just going to have a little bit of duplication code, but I think that's fine because it makes it really clear what each thing is doing. And we're just going to return a div, and we're going to do a button, and on click we want to handle show, and I want the class name to be button, let's say success, make it green, and I'll do new note. Cool. And next we want to do note modal, and okay, so here's where it gets interesting, because we'll have to pass a note modal, we'll have to pass a handle form submit, we'll have to pass a show, and handle close. So this thing needs handle close and it needs handle show, right, by default. So we have to pass this in here. So let's type it right now to get those out of the way. So we need show and we need handle close. Now, why do we need note and handle form submit? Because since we're calling this thing from two different options, edit and new note, we need to pass a note. So if it exists, by passing the note in here, we're going to be able to show this note. So that's why we need to pass a note. And why we need to pass a handle form submit? Because depending on who's calling this, if it's new note or edit note, it's going to do different things. So those two different things. So basically this is a function. We're passing in a function that we're going to be calling. And maybe I'm ahead of myself, so don't worry about it if it's not clear yet. It's going to make a lot of sense in a moment when we get to this. So for now, let me finish writing this thing. So we're going to be passing note to this guy, which for a new note model is just going to be null. There's not going to be anything in there. We're going to pass handle form submit, and then this is still, we haven't created this yet. We're going to pass show, and then we're going to pass handle close. Okay. Cool. So let's do the same thing now for the edit note model. So actually, let me close this real quick. So all right, I'm closing this. I'm missing equal sign here. Okay, sweet. So I'm just going to copy this thing. And then the difference is this is just going to be an edit. And then this is actually going to pass a note, which in here, meaning needs to take a note. Okay. So what are we missing? We're missing the function we're going to be passing in here to this guy. And we're missing putting the information we need right now for this thing to show what it's supposed to show. So let's let's write some stuff in here. So let's get rid of this thing because we did that already. Okay, and let's get rid of this guy because we don't need this guy. Cool. And now in here, what we want to do is we're going to have a form to take input from the user, or to be able to write a new note or edit that note. So right here, and we can do it just below header. We'll do form, and on submit, we're going to get an event. And that event, we're going to prevent default. And this is used to prevent refresh on the page. And now we're going to call handle form submit, which is a function we're going to create. And we're going to pass a dispatch and some note. Let's call it like model note, say, which is the note that is being edited or created in this modal. And we're about to create that variable. So hold on for a second. So let me close this form. Let me close this form right here. And what we need to do too is get rid of this message, which is hard-coded right now. And let's do an input group. And I'll explain how everything works as soon as I'm done typing here all this stuff down. Form is control. So this will be a value of that thing we called a modal note, which is null. If it's null, we're just going to do an empty string, meaning if it's a new note, it should be empty. Shouldn't be anything written in there. Else, we're just going to show the modal note, meaning it's a note that is being edited. So that's for this thing. And then on change, we're going to pass an event. And then we're going to set a modal note to event that target that value. Okay. And this is, okay, cool. And then you may be asking, well, what is this modal note and set modal note? For those of you that are not familiar with React, this is just simply this is from the use state hook. This is a way to have, like, remember when I was saying like state in the component itself? So we're about to create that right now. So this is just modal note and then set modal note. And then this will be from the use state hook. So this is essentially the variable. So this will have a value, which in our case will be whatever notes we write or whatever note we're editing it. And then this is the way to set this value. So set modal note is right here, and we're setting it to the event target value, which is the value the user is typing. So whenever we change it, we're keeping track of this, and then we're making sure we have the user's value. So this is pretty much it for the modal. On handle form submit, we're going to pass dispatch, and then we're going to pass the modal note, which is the note itself. And there's one thing or a couple of things we're missing. Let's add the dispatch. There's dispatch, and it always autocompletes when I don't need it to. Okay. I can delete that. Okay, and then Why do we need this? Because we need to set the first time, or whenever this node changes, we need to set this internal node. So let's for that, we're going to use a use effect, which we have used before. It takes a function, and the function, what it's going to do is just going to set this model node, and then we're going to set it with that incoming node we're passing, and we're going to execute this every time node changes. Meaning, if they click on a different edit, we're going to pass a different node into here. So this thing is going to execute, and it's going to set the model node. And then with that model node, it's just going to display this in the as the value itself. Nice. So let's see, what are we missing? We're missing some imports, because sometimes it imports by default, like some of the stuff, and then sometimes it just it kind of slacks on me for some reason. Okay, so let's import React. And then use state, use effect. Ooh. Use effect from React. Nice. Let's import use dispatch from React Redux. Okay. And from this guy, we're missing a lot of stuff. We're missing the form, we're missing the modal, button, and input group, we have that. And last thing will be form control. Okay, so I think we have everything we need right now. So things we're missing is we need to pass a handle form submit when it's a new node and edit node to this guy, so this guy can actually execute something. And where are we going to do this? So if you remember, this is going to be a request to our backend, which goes into our services. So with that, let's head over to notes right here, and let's do a couple of these. We're gonna do one for new note and one for edit note. Edit note, and this is gonna have some kind of response, which I'm just gonna copy this thing. Okay. Oh, I didn't copy it. Wow. Okay. So I'm going back here, paste in this thing. Okay, response. It's not an array. It's going to be some kind of object. So basically, we're going to make a call, and then we're going to receive the value and the ID. At the minimum, it needs the ID created. So with that, we're just gonna have a new note and pass in the response. And then let me copy this thing. And then this will be edit note. And we pass in the response. And instead of having this message, we can have just notes here, and we can have note here as well. So cool, we're passing note into this thing, and we're calling new note. I think that's what we call it. Yeah, new note and edit notes. So we're dispatching this action with the response. we're dispatching this action with its response. So now we're ready to go back to the modal. And so this thing, the handle form submit for this guy is going to be new note. And the handle form submit for this guy is going to be edit note. So what we got to do is we got to import this thing, new note, edit note, from services / notes. Don't see any errors yet, so that's a good sign. So now let's head over to notes table and let's add the edit note modal here. So I'm copy and pasting this thing, but what I want to do is I want to add this guy, and then I'm going to pass it the note. So I'm going to pass n that value to this guy. Okay. I think we're looking good here. So let's head over to app.js and add that here. So we want to add it in probably on top of the table. Yeah, we'll put it here. And then let's move it to the right. Text line, right. And then let's add it in here. New notes modal. And let's check it out. Okay, gotta change the colors from that, but let's try it out. And it didn't work. See the actions, new note. It's right in the note, but it's not in the state. So something went wrong there. Let's try the edit. Okay, close. Build more full stack applications. Cool. It's opening the right one. And if I open this one now, okay. So let's try to change this test. Okay. That one also didn't get updated. And the action didn't get triggered. So let's go back to the app. Okay, so there seems to be something wrong with the form, apparently. So check spelling. This looks good. This looks good. Let's go back to the modal. New note, edit note. Those are getting passed in here. On form submit, we are calling the function. Looks good. But this guy is not type submit. So let's change that. Type submit. Since we're here, let's also change that color of the edit note to warning. Okay, let's try it again. This is a test note. Okay, it didn't seem to have updated the state. And in fact, it's not here. Let's see if the edit works. I love writing notes too. And that also didn't do it. Okay, so let's go back to the app. Actually, let's test that delete works. Delete still works. So let's go back to the app and keep debugging, see what else we can find. Okay, so let's double check the reducer, making sure that we don't have any other typos. Oh, okay, I see. I totally mistyped this. So action types. That's why I was never making the change. So let's go back and let's test this now. All right, let's close this thing. This is a test. Edit. This was a test. Cool. Okay, so it seems to be working. And the reason why I did the first one when I clicked that one is because this one we hard-coded a ID value of 1. Okay, so this is exciting because we are about to start writing our web API. And why do we need this? So think about it as a web API it's like an interface that we programmers use to access data or modify it, or some interaction with data. So it's an interface and it does the rest for us. So we hit those endpoints and inside that service does whatever it's meant to do and be done, right? So just think about it like this, and as we start working on this, you will feel more comfortable with it. Okay, so now let's go to Visual Studio and let's create our backend projects. So we're gonna select ASP.NET Core Web Application, click Next. Let's name it Notes Web API. Select the location where you want that project to be created and then hit Create. Okay, now we're gonna select API. Okay, so now we should have our 3.1 .NET Core application. If we double click here, we're gonna see that create a .NET Core app 3.1. So if we run this right now, by default it has a controller and it goes directly into this guy, and we're gonna change that in a minute. So let's get rid of this guy. Let's delete that. We don't need that. Okay. And let's rename this to Notes Controller. Yes. Let's open Properties, Launch Settings. And launch URL is set to this guy, weather forecast. Let's change that to notes. And let's do the same thing for this other one. So if we go back here, the route is set as square brackets controller. And what this means is it's going to get the name of the file, except the controller part, and then name that the route. So in this case, the route will be notes. Let's clean this up a little bit. Let's delete this stuff. Let's delete this stuff. And let's get rid of this. So an action result. And let's return okay. Let's get rid of this things that we're not using as of right now. And let's see if it builds and runs successfully. All right, so it's opening up notes. That's what we want. And then we have my first note. Okay, so this is really good progress. Next, let's create our database. So let's right click here. Let's go to add, new project. So let's create a class library. Let's call it notes.db. Create. We can rename this class to say notes.cs. Yes. And this is what we want to do. We're going to create a model, and then we're going to do a migration to create basically our schema. And if we go to Microsoft documentation, we can see how to do this. And this is to create the model. Basically, we have a class specifying what tables look like, and we need this configuration in order to create the migration and create our table. Our table is going to look like just an ID and a value for our note. So let's copy this thing right here, because we need that. Let's go over here and create another class. Let's call this one app DB context or something like that. Let's make this public. Let's paste that code in there. Let's reuse this. Let's get rid of all this stuff. Perfect. And then if we do Alt-Enter, it's going to give us some intelligence of like what to use. And if we go here, we want to install package Microsoft Entity Framework Core. Find and install latest version. So let's click on that. And that automatically gets imported for us. So it's using that. And instead of blog, we want to use this model. So let's use notes. And let's call this notes. Let's get rid of this one because we don't need this guy. And right here, this is fine. Okay, we'll have to install that in a second. And I think we are pretty good. One thing I want to do is go right here to note. And let's create our key, which is a public int ID. This is called a property. And let's create one for a value. Okay, so we have this created. There are a couple of things we're missing. So we need this guy. So let's right click on this project and let's go to manage Nuget Packages. And right now we only have Microsoft Entity Framework Core installed, and we're going to need a couple more at least. So we'll need Microsoft SQLServer. So let's install that one. Accept. Now let's install. We need tools in order to do migration. Let's install that guy. And this should be good for now. Now this is recognized and this is all good. Let's change the database name to notes. Okay. Now let's go to tools, Nuget Package Manager console, and let's try to create our first migration. If we click here, we want to pick Notes DB. So let's pick that one as our default. And to create a migration, we just got to do add migration, and let's call it some name. So we can call it initial, for example. Let's hit that, see what happens. Okay, so it's saying your startup project notes web API doesn't reference Microsoft Entity Framework Core design. So let's install that in this guy. So let's go to Manage Nuget Packages, browse, paste that in there, and let's install this guy. Let's go back to Package Manager console. If you click the up arrow, you can run the command again. Let's reference it. So if we right click here, you add a reference to Notes DB project. Let's do that. Let's go back. Let's try to run it again. Okay, and this generated our migration, and I wanted to go step by step so you guys see these errors in case you run up to them, so that you know what to do. Okay, so if this looks all right, which we have a primary key of an ID, and that looks good, and then we have a value, this looks good to me. So now what we got to do is we're going to write update database. And build success. So now if we go to SQL Object Explorer, or you can click on View and then SQL Object Explorer, this should pop up. You open this up, and this one, and then databases, and then you'll see notes right here. Then you can open the tables, and then you'll see the table notes. And if you click View Data, you can see that we have an ID and value. So now we have a database set up and ready to use. So now that we have our database set up, we can go ahead and create our first endpoint, or maybe our second endpoint, because the first one was given for us by default. So let's do a post. And a post is used to, every time you're gonna create something. So whenever you're gonna create something new, you do a post, and we're keeping the same route, meaning it's gonna be localhost, whichever port this is running on, slash the name of the controller, which in this case is just note, and that's it. Let's rename this method to say create note, and instead of returning OK, what we're going to do is we're going to create a new class library, because you shouldn't have access to your database directly in the controller. That's not good practice. So right now we have our Notes web API, and we have our Notes database. We're also going to create a Notes.core, which is going to have our business logic, and it's going to have the connection to the database. So let's right click on our solution, add new project, class library, next, and let's call it Notes.core. Create. And now we have Notes.core. All right, let's right click on web API real quick and add a reference to it. And now right here, we can rename this to say note services. Okay. So right here, the first thing we're going to do is in the constructor, we're going to get an app.db context. Let's just call it context. And then this is going to be getting via, so we need to, so you see what I just did there. I added a reference from core to database. So if we right click and we go to reference, we'll see that I added a reference here because I need reference to this project, which has app.db context. Okay, so let's declare this private app.db context. Okay, so let's set in the constructor context. So what this is going to do, this is going to, whenever a project is running and we need a app.db context, whenever we need to access this class, dependency injection is going to provide a app.db context for us. And dependency injection is more of an advanced topic, and I don't want to get into this topic right now. But basically, we're going to get an instance of our context when we need it. So let's create that method. Let's call it public, and let's say it's going to return note, and I'm going to call it create note, and we're going to pass in a note. And now with that, we can do context that add note. And then this should add that note coming in. And in order for this to take change in the database, we have to save the changes. And then all we got to do is return that note. And with this, we are pretty much done for this part. There's a couple of things that are going to happen, and it won't work until we add some configuration. We're missing some tiny configuration that we haven't yet created. So let's do that next. So for this to be able to access the app.db context, let's head out to startup, and here's where we configure our services, and let's configure our db context to be db context. Now it should be able to access the app.db context right now. So there's one more thing that we got to add, and it's a tiny change. But first I'm going to run it without adding it so you guys see what it looks like, and if it happens to you in the future, you know what it is. It's a tiny configuration. So let's save this right now. Let's go back to our controller. And we said we're going to call create note from note service. So like I said before, we're going to inject that via dependency injection. So let's do that here. So we're going to do, one more thing we're missing before that. Let's go back here to note service and real quick create an interface, because we need an interface to properly do our dependency injection. So let's do nodes, services, and then C# is good to, it's a good practice to put the I for interfaces. And then in here, let's make it public. And all we got to put is this little thing. And let's include that. One thing to note is that I'm using the model as what is being transferred to back to the UI, and that's not good to do because the database may have other fields that you don't want to expose. Say you have like a social security number for someone, and you don't want to take that out. What you usually do is you have a DTO in the core project, which is a data transfer object, and you map the fields that you need between the DTO and the model itself. Right now this is really small, so I'm just going to leave it like this, but just keep that in mind in future applications. So let's head back to our controller and let's inject that guy. So this is an I nodes. Oh, and I forgot to implement this actually. I nodes service. There you go. Sorry about that. So let's head back to the controller now and get an I nodes services. Nodes services. Perfect. And let's include that. Okay. And then I'm going to copy this thing. I'm going to do private, this guy, and then I'll do underscore. Node service. So now all we got to do is essentially make the call here to nodes.services, create note, and pass in a note. Meaning we have to get a note from the outside. And I'm missing parentheses. Now let's make sure it is building. Perfect. So let's give this a shot now. So to test this change, we're going to use Postman. Postman is free to download, and feel free to download it or use whatever tool you want to use or you used to. So one thing I like to do is change this to Notes Web API because it because it gives me this nice console and I can see any errors that are happening or whatnot. So this will not be able to do a post request, so that's why we need Postman. So in Postman, what we're going to do is we're going to copy this path, put it here, click add, let's add it here, and post and send. So we get this error back. We get a 500. It says unable to resolve service for type I node service while attempting to activate. And this is what I was mentioning before, that we're missing a tiny configuration in order for this to work. And I wanted to make it fail on purpose so that you guys remember next time it happens to you, you'll be like, oh yeah, I'm missing this thing. So let's fix that real quick. So we're going to go to startup, and we're going to go to services, add transient, and we're going to have I nodes service, comma, node services. And this is all we need for it to be able to inject that into our controller. And there's different types. There's transient, there's scoped, and singleton. A singleton would create only one instance through the life of the application. Scope will create an instance per request, and transient will create an instance every time it needs to use it, pretty much. So we're gonna go with transient for now. So let's run this again. Let's open up Postman. Let's hit it. See what happens. Unsupported media type. So now we need to pass in the object that we want. So it was, we don't need to pass the ID, we just need value. And we'll put a value of, this is my first note. And let's hit that. And I'm missing quotations here. This is JSON format. Keep that in mind. Okay, so we received an OK, received a ID of 1, and this is my first note back. And if we minimize this, and we go to SQLServer Object Explorer, and we open notes, and then we open notes table, and it's empty. So let's refresh it here. And there you go. This is our first note. So looking back at our controller, we saw that we got a 200 instead of a 201 when we create something. And it's good practice whenever you're creating something to respond with a 201, because that means created instead of OK. So for us to do that, we should create another endpoint that will be a get, and we're going to pass it an ID in the route, be public, my action result, get note, and it will be an ID. And then this is going to return OK. And it's notes service that get note. And let's pass in the ID. This doesn't exist yet, so let's go back to this guy and add that. So what we're going to do is context that notes that first, and that's link, using link. You're going to pass a note and then check that ID. If that ID equals this ID coming in, then we have ourselves a note, and that's what we're going to return. So let's just return that. So the difference between first and default, first or default, is first will throw an exception if it doesn't find anything, and first or default will return a null value, and then you can do whatever you want to do with it. In our case, just throwing the exception is fine. So we have this implemented. So let's make sure it builds. All right, built successfully. Let's start it up, and I want to pull up Postman. Let's copy this guy. Actually, we don't even have to use Postman. We can just do /1. And there you go. This is my first note. And just to use it in Postman, you can just copy this thing and use Postman as well. and you send it, and there you go, we get the response. Now coming back to the controller, what we can do is fix this OK to return instead, not this one, to return instead a created at route. And let's move this out of here. Let's do var new node, and then it will need a address, so get node, and it will need a new node that ID, and then the new node itself. Now this will return a 201 if successful. So let's test that. So I'm going to copy this, paste it in here, post, body. Actually, I'm gonna copy this guy, save time, and I'll do raw is fine. Get rid of the value, the int, the ID, I mean. This is my other note, and let's click send, and we get an unsupported, even though we have, I believe we have everything right. Oh, we need to change it to JSON. Okay, let's test it now. All right, and we're getting no route matches the supply value. So we'll have to go back and fix the route because I guess we didn't put the correct route there. Let's go back here and get node. Oh, okay. So I called it by the name that I will give it. You can put the route or the name. So if we just wanna be more fancy or lazy, whatever you wanna call it, I will call this just get note. And then that way, oops, that way we can just call it by that reference, and let's try it again. And if we hit this now, what do we get? Sweet, ID 7, this is my other note, and if you see right here, we get a created. Sweet. So let's go ahead now and implement the other endpoints we're missing. So we can do an HTTP get public action result get notes. This is to get all the notes, and this is going to return okay. Another way to implement this is to combine this one and this one. It's really up to you. It's personal preference. So I'm going to save this, and I'm going to go to the interface right here, and I'll call this get notes. Okay, and then this will return a list of notes. Oops, of notes. Okay, so let's copy this thing. All right, so this is going to return context that notes this. Okay. And then what we can do here is to list. And then this should return all the notes we currently have, and we can test this. Let's try it out. And we see all the ones that we have created. We have some duplicates ones, but these are all the notes we have so far. Okay, so now we want to add the delete endpoint, and I'm gonna start pinning these because we're not using the other one so far. So I'm gonna close these. I'm gonna keep these 3, and the rest I'm just closing right now. Okay, so let's do HTTP delete public iaction result delete note, and let's get an ID. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna get an ID right here. And then we're gonna call node service that delete note, and we're gonna pass an ID. And then we're just gonna return okay. So we need to implement this. So let's write it here. Get rid of that space. This would be void delete note, and we're gonna get an ID. Copy that. Public. And now right here, what we want to do is we want to look for that note and just remove it from the array. That's pretty much all we gotta do. And I believe it will work if we pass in the note, just the, no, because we gotta find it, right? Because we're not passing the note. So let's just search for that. So let's do note. So it will be context that notes that first, and then n where n.id equals ID. So if it doesn't find one, it's going to explode and it's going to throw an exception pretty much. So if it finds one, there's going to be a note, and what we want to do is we just want to do context that notes that remove this note. And like always, we want to make sure we save the changes. And that's all we got to do. Let's run this and head over to Postman and check this out. All right, we created 7 last time, so why don't we delete this guy now? Delete 7, none right here, and let's see. Okay, we got it to 100. What happens if we hit it again? Okay, exception, here it is. Invalid operation exception contains no elements, meaning that one doesn't exist anymore. Cool, now let's do our last endpoint, which is a put. This is used for modifying data, pretty much. So let's do HTTP put, and let's pass in an ID. And call this public iaction result edit note, and we're going to pass in int ID, and from the body we want to pass in a note. So basically we're passing the ID of even though we don't really need that ID, so we can assume that the ID of the note is enough. So yeah, let's do that. Let's get rid of this guy then. Let's get rid of this guy. Let's get rid of this guy. Okay, so now we're gonna call node services that edit notes, and let's pass in note. And then we just return, okay. So let's go here. Yeah, it's fine. We don't need to return it. Edit note, and it takes a note. Copy this guy, and then we stop the project too. That's why you see that purple line, meaning changes are not taken into account. So let's do public void. Oops, I wrote it twice. And here we want to get the note and update that value. Context that notes that first ID needs to match the incoming note ID. Oh. Okay, edit note. That's good to me. ID. And then what we want to do is have this edit note that value equals the notes that ID. The note that value. And like always, we need to save our changes. Save changes. There you go. And let's test this out. So, well, I didn't run it. Let's run it first. Okay, it's running. So I'm gonna get the first value, the ID number 1. It says this is my first note, and now I want to change that. I'm gonna copy this actually, and I want to do a. I'll do a put. I'll delete this stuff, and then I'll go to the body and do raw JSON. Insert this in here and change this thing to be, this is looking amazing. Let's run this. Hopefully we get a 200. We got a 200. Now let's do a get of this, and indeed it got updated. So sweet, we have all the endpoints and we're ready to jump back to React and just finish hooking everything up together. Okay, so now we're back in the front end and we're ready to connect the front end and the back end. This is really, really exciting. So, okay, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna install Axios, which is an NPM package. And Axios is going to make our life a lot easier by making requests, building a request for us really, really simple. So let's do npm install Axios, and then this should take, I think, a minute or probably less. So I'll show it up right when it's done. All right, so we finished installing. That was pretty fast. Let's import now. Let's go to services, and here is where we're going to make our we're gonna make our HTTP request. So let's import Axios from Axios. And let's create an Axios instance. And right here, we're going to set the base URL. And in our case, well, at least in my case, which probably is going to be the same for you guys, it's going to be localhost 5001 nodes. And this is essentially the URL that shows up when you run the web API, what we were testing in Postman and whatnot. So that's what you got to write in here. So we have our instance, and then we're ready to basically get rid of this and do const data, because it returns data. And we're going to await this and instance that get, and we'll replace response with this thing. And that's pretty much it. Now let's pull it up. Let's see if it works. So I'm going to start the web API, and it should, there you go. And this is the URL I was talking about, the base URL. Maybe it's the same for you, maybe it's different, so make sure you copy yours. And let's start this bad boy up too. Let's see what we get here now. Okay, so the page pulled up, but we don't see any notes, and we know we had some notes, right, from earlier. So what's going on here? Let's hit F12. And as we see right here, we have a course policy error. And what is this thing? This is a cross-origin. It happens when there is like cross-origin requests made between like a web browser and a server. So when there is different, like for example, this guy is localhost 3000 and our web API is running in localhost 5001. So you will get this. So I'm not going to go in detail of like what it is and all this stuff. Instead, what I want to do in this video is I'm just going to show you how to fix it. And if you guys need me to go over it, I can make another video about it and just go over this. But for now, I'm just going to show you how to fix it. So to fix the course issue, we're going to go back to our web API. We're going to stop it from running. And we're going to go to configure services in startup, and we're going to add a policy. So we're going to do services that add course options, or you can name it whatever you want. And then we're going to do options that add policy, and then we're going to name it something. In this case, I'm just going to name it nodes policy. And then we're going to do builder and curly braces. There you go. We're going to do builder that with origin, and this specifies the origin. And for right now, we're just going to do star. You should be putting wherever you're expecting the request, but I think it's fine for right now. And then I'm going to do allow any header and allow any method. Okay. And missing semicolon here, semicolon here, semicolon here, and perfect. Okay. Cool. Now we add it. Now we got to put it in the middleware. So to do that, we just need to add it. Let's add it after routing. Use course and then let's put that same name. Let me actually copy and paste it. So the order right here does matter in the configure method, because this is a middleware. So the order matters, how stuff is executed. And this is more details into how .NET Core works. I'm not going to go into those details right now, but just know that in here it does matter the order of how you put stuff. In here it doesn't really matter, but in here it does. So keep that in mind. So now let's go back to our local host, and it already refreshed. I think. Oh, I think that was cached or something. Okay, let's start it back up because I did not do that. Okay, so let's run it again. Minimize this, F5. And here you go. We have all of our notes show up, which I have a bunch of duplicate ones, but this is pretty cool. I am very excited to show you guys this. All right, so let's keep hooking the rest of the stuff up. Okay, so we're back to our service class. Let's continue. We did get notes. Let's do delete note now. So we're gonna do const data equals await Axios instance that get, and we'll have to have I think it's slash, yes, and then we need the note that ID, I believe. So we set it up, and all we have to pass back in this case is the note, because we're not returning. So when we did the web API, we didn't return anything. So we're just gonna get a 200. So if this passes, we just pass the note here and it gets deleted. So I think this should work. So let's pull up the application and we'll see. It's not it. Where are you? Here. Okay. So, okay, let's try to delete one of these. Okay, gone. Cool. Cool. Okay, so far it looks like it's deleting properly. I'm gonna refresh the page. Ooh, so it didn't actually get deleted. Okay, so let's do F12, see what happens when we do this thing. Okay, we're getting an error. So a little debugging. Let's put a breakpoint in here. And let's hit that again. Okay, so we're getting the error way before that. So, okay, I see. So I forgot to change this. It should be delete. All right, so let me pull up the app again. Let's refresh this. Close this stuff. Okay, now we hit the breakpoint. Cool. So we're now here with ID 5. So I'm gonna let that, oops, I should have let that go. I wanna continue that, continue, and gone. So I'm gonna delete all this stuff. And now I'm gonna refresh, and we only have one. Nice. Okay, so now we're back to our service, and actually let's delete this because we don't need this. We're not using it. And let's go to the next one. The next one is new note. So that's what we're doing before. Let's do data and do await Axios instance, that post. the first parameter, you can see it right here, so URL. So we're just gonna leave it empty, and then we're gonna pass note. But note right now is just a string, so we gotta make an object with the value and then note. That way it can be parsed in the C# side. And let's pass in the response. So it's data. So we save this and let's pull up the app and see if it's working. So this is my first note written to the database from the UI. We save this and sweet, we have the option to write notes now. So this is really cool. So next stop is just edit. That's the only thing we're missing. All right, so on to the last connection. So remember when we were writing the front end that I think we were passing a note, but as a string, same as this guy. And by doing that, what was happening is that if we pass a string to the request that we're about to write, it won't know which ID it is. So we'll have to fix that in a minute. But first I want to write this little template thing real quick. And I'm going to do a wait, Axios instance, that put, and this, yes, it doesn't take any other thing. It just takes the note itself, which we will have to fix that because right now we're just getting a string there, and probably we'll have to need to update this guy as well. So if we go back to the modal, we'll see that the handle form submit is passing a modal note, which is a string. So it's not an object that has an ID. So we won't know in the web API which node to update if we don't have an ID. So since it's passing just a string, we got to make this an object instead. And then this guy is being set by this node, which is getting passed in by these two guys. New node, it doesn't matter because it's null, but edit node is getting passed this string and it's getting passed into it as well. And who's passing this edit node? And that's nodes table. So nodes table is passing and that value, meaning it's passing the string, and we don't want that. Instead, we want to pass the whole node. That way we have the ID and the value. So now that we have, and I hope this makes sense, but now that we have the node, we're passing the node here, which is getting passed into the node model, which we're setting the node as an object now. And that's where we're dispatching, right? So we got to take care of how the actual form looks like. So if the modal node is null, just display empty. I think this is fine. Else display modal node. Well, we have to do modal node that value. So we display the actual string. And on change, then what we want to do is keep modal node the same. So we're going to do the spread operator and keep the modal node the same. And then we're going to set the value to this new value being set right here. And I think that's all we got to do for this right now. Just close the curly brace right there. And unless we have some kind of issue somewhere. Okay, it went away. Cool. So it's looking good. And then that's it. Let's pull up the app. And now let's try to edit something. So let's add a number, say 2. We're going to save it. Nothing really happens. Maybe if we refresh. Okay. So it did update the node on the on the back end. It's just that the front end is not refreshing, and I bet it has to do with that change we just did. Let's try to add a new note, see if this one works. And this one also broke. So let's fix that real quick. So the new note now is getting the whole object. So we don't have to do this anymore. We can just pass note. And I think that will fix it. And let's test that right now. This is an amazing experience. Is it amazing? There you go. Cool. So that worked. So now let's fix the other stuff. Okay, so we're back here and we want to fix the edit notes. And you guys remember when we were doing the controller, the endpoint for the editing a note, and we actually didn't return anything. So the problem is that this is most likely getting nothing. So what we're gonna do is, if this thing is successful, we're just gonna set note instead of data. And I believe this should fix our issue. Let's check it out. So I'm gonna fix this. All right, so it updates on the spot. So with this, we finished the tutorial. I want to congratulate you for watching this, and I hope you got something from it. I know when I started, it was hard to learn all these concepts and seeing how one thing works with another. Remember, this is practice. You gotta learn and then you gotta practice. If you want to be like Michael Jordan, you need to practice every day and repeat. Don't be intimidated by how things may look, and it may be very overwhelming at times. I think we all have felt that at some point. So all you got to do is keep at it. You'll get good at it. You just need to learn more and do as many projects as you can. Practice, watch more videos, learn from different people, and then just keep improving yourself. So I believe in you. I know you got this. If you have any other questions, feel free to leave it in the comments and I'll try to answer them. I know I didn't go into details on some areas because this will make this video a lot longer, this tutorial. So I wanted to keep it more light and something that is hands-on and you can just go ahead and do. So please, if you got anything from this video, I really appreciate if you like the video and subscribe. It will really help me out. And that's it. You guys have a great one.